Morning.
Good morning. I'm trying to contact the individual identified as the Zoom user on the Zoom broadcast. You could identify yourself, please. We're just trying to see if you are one of the board members.
Mike Billig's on here. I'm not sure if that's me or not.
It must be. You were the only one. So let me promote you to panelist.
And I'll be driving, so I'll be probably muted half the time, and I'll try to listen in as much as possible. All right.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kara. Kara Weber has joined us. So we now have 2 board members online, 3 present. We have 5 available.
All right.
Let's vote on stuff.
All right, let's call this meeting to order. Do we have to do a roll call for quorum?
Yes, just to make sure. That would be a good idea.
All right, Roger, if you could do the roll call
Todd Rutman,
here.
Tom Castellini, David Roush, Michael Billig,
Here.
Steve Freeland, here, Steve Heron, here, Carol Mullet, Carol Weber.
Here.
Thank you.
All right.
We do have 5 members present.
All right, so we do have a quorum. We have the agenda in front of us. We have a motion to adopt this agenda.
Motion to adopt.
A second?
I'll second it. Steve?
All right, Roger, do a roll call for us.
Todd Rutman,
Aye.
Michael Billig,
Aye.
Steve Freeland,
Aye.
Steve Heron,
Aye.
Carol Weber.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, then we move on to the approval of the minutes. I guess I actually have one change to the agenda. We do have an amended April 27th meeting minutes in which, under the category of the ZARC boundaries, there's acknowledgement of 2 letters received on that agenda item, and that the discussion was going to be tabled for future members to be able to review that information. So I've added that to the agenda. Should we do a roll call vote on reviewing those minutes as well then?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we want to review all 3 and then approve all 3, or do we want to just do one at a time?
What's the official procedure for that? Do you know? Can we do all 3 at once?
I would recommend maybe doing each individually,
Okay.
just so that there's no confusion.
Okay. So if everybody's looked at the April meeting minutes with the revisions that were done in red on there, get a motion to approve those.
This is Steve. I make the motion to approve the amended minutes for April.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Roger, roll call on that.
Michael Billig,
Yes, thank you for updating those two. Good catches.
Steve Freeland,
Aye.
Steve Heron,
Aye.
Carol Weber,
Aye.
Todd Rutman.
Aye. All right, then moving on to the May 25th meeting minutes. Those are in our packet. Has everybody had a chance to review those?
I did motion to approve May minutes.
We have a second?
This is Steve. I make a second.
All right, Roger, roll call.
Steve Freeland,
Aye.
Steve Heron.
Aye.
Carol Weber,
Aye.
Todd Rutman,
Aye.
Michael Billig.
Aye.
Great. All right, now we moved on to our third set of meeting minutes, which are for June the 22nd. These are the latest and greatest from last month. So everybody make sure you read through that. All right, do we have a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
This is Steve. I make the motion.
All right, we've got a motion by Mike Billig and a second by Steve Freeland. So Roger, roll call on that.
And before I take the roll call, I'd like to add that both David Roush and Tom Castellini have joined us online.
Okay,
So I will include them in this vote. Todd Rotman,
aye.
Tom Castellini. Tom, you are muted.
Sorry, having a little difficulty with my computer this morning.
And Tom, we need your vote on approval of the June 22nd.
I
minutes.
approve. Aye.
Thank you. David Roush,
Aye.
Michael Billig,
Aye.
Steve Freeland. Aye. Steve Heron,
Aye.
Carol Weber.
Aye.
Thank you.
I don't think I voted.
Oh, Todd Rutman.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on to the reports, the financial summary that is also in the packet. We have 3 active projects, 2 of which have been approved for $25,000, the 75 North Main Street, and then 135 South Main Street. And then we have a third one, which will not be presenting this evening as they are trying to get other town approvals prior to coming to ZARC for final approval. So we do have their application, but it is not time to review that right now. Any questions on this financial summary with the note that we have an agenda item further down where we actually talk about the additional funding? Does anybody have any questions on this financial summary?
Steve, did we release the 25,000 to Cohatchee?
The original amount?
Yeah.
It's been approved. I don't know. No funds have been released because construction's not complete, but
Oh,
it
that's
has
okay.
been approved.
Okay.
All right, hearing no questions on the financial summary, we'll move on to old business. The first item is the facade grant packet modifications, which includes a boundary map. We do have the new packet, thanks to Roger's hard work. The changes that we'd like to point out would be on the third page where it's the facade grant program summary. We have changed the eligibility to be all existing non-1 and 2 family buildings within the ZARC boundaries instead of the ambiguous language about being contiguous to the area. And the next item that got modified would be the map. Oh, and then the clarification, just that the maximum cap for project is listed on the summary as well as the application at 25,000. It wasn't super clear on both of them previously, so that's been updated. And then we have the new map, which is labeled page number 8 within the packet. You'll notice in the upper right-hand corner of the map, there is a description that has been added that says any building being utilized as a 1 or 2 family residence as of July 1st, 2021 within the facade grant boundary area is not eligible for ZARC grants. So this does set a date of July 1st, 2021, that any house that is a 1 or 2 family residence at that time is not going to be eligible for grants. This will further decrease any motivation to change a single family or 2 family residence into a commercial use.
Hey, Todd, this is Dave. Can I ask a clarifying question on that?
Yes.
Since I haven't taken a look at my homework here, does that include houses that are in the VBD or a business zoning district that are still being used?
I'm not exactly sure on the question.
So let me clarify. There are a couple of houses that I know of that are in the VBD or the business, I forget what it is, B1 district, that really the only reason they're not being used commercially is because people haven't been able to make the finances work. But I think it would be, I don't know what the right word is here, but I don't think you want to disincent a residence that's inside of the business zoning districts from being able to receive a grant in the future. So I'll give you a specific example. The house at 190 Pine Street across from Flanner and Buchanan, that property is zoned business, and all of the properties north and south of it are non-residential, but it's being used as a single family rental residence. So if this excludes that and those like it, I think there's a couple up on Poplar maybe as well, or Elm, I don't know. I guess it would be worth clarifying.
Dave, I have a question on that. That White House, I know exactly what you're talking about. Is it already zoned commercial or is it double zoned?
No, it's zoned commercial.
So if it's existing zoned commercial, I don't know if we can exclude it. We don't have that kind of power.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe this text box on the map should go away because we kind of covered our requirements in the written portion already. And this would be somewhat duplicative as well as adding further restrictions, which I do feel down the road would be hard to implement because 10 years from now, it's going to be hard to remember how the building was being utilized on July the 1st of 2021.
Yeah, I don't have any concern about marking that date, for the whole Second Street infringement or whatever it is. I get all that. That doesn't seem problematic, but it does seem like there are a small handful of houses you could even make an argument that the greenhouse on the corner of Pine and Elm is still a single family use, because it's not been anything since, even though it's been vacant and derelict for now, however many years. But I think it would be troubling to do anything that would disincent buildings that are within the village business district or a business zoning. In fact, you'd almost want to go the other way, but that's an editorial comment. So I just think that ought to be maybe made pretty clear there.
I think we, within the new language in the written portion, we say that the building has to be an existing non-1 and 2 family residential building for our funding, which means if it's being converted from a house to a business, they would not be eligible for our funding.
Well, I think
but further down the road, because it already is a business, if they're doing facade work, it would be eligible.
Yeah, I think maybe the catchword there is existing, that it's really what is the proposed use that is what's going to make it. It's not really so much what it is today, it's what it's going to be as part of the renovation. So again, I think you're talking about, a small handful of structures, but that one specifically on Pine Street, I mean, that would be something that, and I don't have any agenda there. It's just a property I know about, and, from the development of the town, you would not want to disincent that, I wouldn't think. And like I said, there may be a couple of others, but that's the most notable.
Right.
So Dave, do you propose changing the red box to say being scratch utilized and just state as any building zoned as?
Yeah, if I could just interject,
I don't
I'd say
have
we
that in
just,
front of me.
yeah, I would just say we take the red box off, because this truly is just a map and it should not be a written description at all.
Do we have anything in this boundary that is not zoned BBD or commercial?
Well, so we aren't a zoning organization, and so for us, it doesn't necessarily matter what it's zoned. It would have to meet a commercial zoning through the town, whether it be a VBD or a variance or something like that.
But wasn't the original intent of the map that we are extending essentially, wasn't it intended to just surround the VBD?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
not a pure line around the VBD area.
Well, and I'd remind the committee that we do have, and I don't know if there are others out there, but Claghorn, as an example, is a non-conforming use in a residential zoning district, and our plan had always allowed for that, and ideally would continue to. I don't know if there are others like that, but
Yeah, our goal is to work with buildings that are being utilized commercially and not to
Correct.
be confused with any type of zoning classification.
correct.
On page 3 of the packet, the eligibility, I still think the language there could be clarified. On point 1, where it says the eligibility for the program should initially meet 3 criteria, the rehabilitation project must be within the boundaries of the facade grant boundary map as depicted on page 8. All existing non-1 and 2 family buildings within ZARC boundaries are eligible. I guess my question is, do we need that second sentence? Still feels like there's some challenge in it. Should we say something about it's been approved for commercial use, and that kind of gives us a blanket to toss it back to zoning if it's been approved for commercial use through zoning or through a variance that's outside of our purview, then we would be allowed to consider it.
Are you thinking specifically because of that situation where that, for example, that one on Pine would want to take advantage of a grant program to become a, nicer facade and become a commercial use, but it's currently existing as a 1 or 2 family, like David was mentioning. So we could not help them basically with this language.
Exactly.
Then we would, without changing the language, we would, I think, have an issue that it's already zoned commercial. And with it already being zoned commercial, they may have an issue if they decided they wanted to develop it, for us to say that they were not included when technically at this date they are included.
I guess
And
that
I
gets
think we
back.
would want to include them.
Pardon me?
And I think you would want to include them if you just think about, good planning and development. I think you don't want to incent the ongoing use of single family residence in a business zoning district.
And also to take into consideration that the town does have a master plan for First Street. So it might be best to leave that as is, and then however we want to put the verbiage to that to include it. But the town does have future plans for First Street that would actually turn that into a commercial property anyway.
I have a question just about definitions. I mean, we're not saying being used as or being zoned as 1 and 2 family buildings, right? We're just saying non 1 and 2 family buildings. The map says you being utilized as. I think that should go away. I agree with that. But there are definitions for what that means. And this is already in a certain zoning district. It's already defined by other parties here. We are not in that game, as you mentioned. So is that greenhouse an existing non, or is it an existing 1 and 2 family building? So where does it stand in the eyes of planning in the town? And that's essentially the definition of that structure. And we aren't trying to include or exclude it with this language. We should be using the definitions that are already out there, already exist, and just saying, and trying to make this intent align with those definitions. So there's no future curiosity. Well, it is zoned to this, but it was being used as 1 and 2 family building, and so therefore it's not eligible. We don't want that to be a future discussion because of this language.
Right.
So I guess I have a question: what is that green building? How is it looked at?
Well, we can certainly pull the property record card for that structure. And if it does indicate single family residence, I want to say last time I looked, there was 3 to 6 single family dwellings within that commercial area that is generally the downtown. 190 West Pine is a residentially utilized, commercially zoned, legal non-conforming single family dwelling. So it's you have the greenhouse that you're speaking of, which is commercially zoned. West Pine, commercially zoned. West Pine is occupied as a residential unit. The house at the corner of the greenhouse is not occupied at this time. Both properties eventually will be redeveloped. Both properties are recommended for commercial use. The sub-area plan that's been mentioned here is the 2014 parking and marketing study, which is the most recent comp plan update for this area.
Yeah, so I guess it gets back to to simplify, it goes back to what we've been talking about the last several months. Do we want this program to be utilized to convert a building that's being used as a 1 or 2 family residence, converting it into commercial? And our discussions over the past couple of months that we didn't want our program to be an incentive for anybody to do that, to help them to do that. But in today's discussion, it sounds like there are properties that are within this boundary that maybe we could help do that because the master plan is showing them as being a commercial use. So that seems to be a shift in what we've been discussing. And so it's if that's the direction we want to go, then yes, we need to change the language. So am I hearing that, yes, there are properties within this boundary that are residential,
But they are appropriately zoned. That's the thing. Like, I wonder if we can get away from 1 and 2 family dwellings, just talk about appropriately zoned structures.
Yeah.
We are not trying to incentivize changes in zoning or use.
Right. And then Carrie, you had stated it, I think, in a pretty good way. when you brought up the point, can you kind of maybe talk about it again on the wording that you were kind of thinking about, like?
Yeah, I think if we adjust it to just being appropriately zoned, or all commercial approved commercial use zoning, whether by variance or otherwise, is eligible as long as it's within the ZARC boundaries.
I don't think we really have an opinion on the appropriate zone. I think that's already up to other committees. I think the zoning is what it is. So I like your second.
And maybe approved zoning is what I mean.
Yeah.
Because the properties that we are talking about are already in the business district. And I think our main concern in a lot of the language was to make sure that we avoided incentivizing anyone that is in the residential area contiguous to the business district to allow them to convert. It's
that's my understanding as well. And I think we want to make sure we draw a clear line that we don't incentivize any of those adjacent properties to, even if they are zoned residentially today, to seek kind of variance use, where they might then trigger some of our eligibility for funds. So to make sure, I think that's the distinction that we want to be clear with. But if we're within the ZARC boundaries and it's already, I shouldn't say already, and it's outside of our purview, it has been approved for the use, business use, then our funds can go toward it.
So should the language say all approved non 1 and 2 family? Well, now we're talking use versus the actual building structure.
I guess I'd like to play devil's advocate though, because if we talk about an approved zoning about a structure, and then we have this map that draws a line, we also now have record of us amending our map to accommodate the evolution of what's been going on in the village. And so we have now documented our willingness to reconsider things outside the boundary. And so that could be argued as an incentive to, as a contiguous structure, go through the process, rezone my structure, and now come to us and say, hey, will you guys redo your map so I can think about doing a facade grant program? I'd like to be included in that. I'm right on the line, and I've rezoned my residence.
Right.
So I'm curious how we get away from that that incentive to become the appropriate zoning. Whereas right now there are structures who are appropriately zoned already. Mm-hmm. We're not saying we condone it or dislike it. We're just saying you're in our map, you're appropriately zoned. We want to help you if you want to look nicer. Simple as that. We don't want to take on more or incentivize changes that could then be brought to the table and say, hey, we want to be in your boundary. We want to be within your map. You did this before. Why not do it again? Sort of request.
I have a simple question. When we started to expand our boundaries, that it was all from the point of Sycamore going south to include possible south construction or projects. So prior to adding that, our boundaries that we presently had, or that we still have, we didn't have any of these issues within our present boundaries. This all came about because when we drew a poor map, and it made the residents feel like that we were encroaching and trying to push commercial to the west. So the existing map prior to us investigating how we move south was just fine. There was no issues with it whatsoever. I think we've covered the verbiage to help the community that was concerned that we were going to be pushing business to the west. I think we have covered that. Everything that has existed prior to that has always been a part of the program. And to try to now label a building, whether it's residential or not, just take a look at what's happening in the village. When Brick Street Inn decides to expand, they're taking down houses. So houses within the Zionsville business district that are there have been converted. Take a look at Serenity. Serenity was converted to a business. So we have tons of examples within our borders or our district as it is now. So sometimes I think we're trying to complicate a very simple issue.
Yeah, I think to that point, if we look at page 3 and the eligibility that we're talking about, if we just scratch out the word existing and we say all non-1 and 2 family buildings within the ZARC boundaries are eligible, then that way, I mean, we're not a zoning authority. If a building isn't zoned for a commercial use, then it's not going to be. I think that's covered through other people. So I think I'm kind of agreeing with Tom. If we just scratch out that word existing, it gets rid of some of that ambiguity or any responsibility on us to determine, you know, what its use is or appropriate use is. What do people think about that?
Well,
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, let zoning decide if the building is commercial, residential, industrial.
Lost your mic.
He went off
We're
to play
the
his
ones
guitar.
deciding cut. If it's existing or new, we'll let them do what they're deciding afterwards. Sorry.
I think that the most important thing that we have here is to ease the minds of the public that have concerns that we are moving west. If we have held true to what we said to them that we would do, I think that this is then finished. Because everything else that we're talking about, since Dave and I have been on this committee, has been included. If the White House across from the funeral home in the corner of Pine came to us and of which we had in the past, but it didn't work out. But they have come to us in the past for a possibility of a grant, and they have the right to do that because they are in our zoning, in our boundary lines, if you will. But once again, we're making a very simple problem complicated. All we need to do is assure the general community that we are not going to encroach anywhere going west. And then in the future, if something is zoned for that, we can stand by always and say that does not fall into the ZARC boundaries. ZARC will have their boundaries, and then whatever the city does outside of our boundaries, we have the opportunity not to participate.
Yeah, so on page 3, if we scratch out the word existing, and then on page 8 on the map, we get rid of the text box, and I think the 2 boxes that say boundary as of July 2021, I think since it's an official document, I don't think we need to put, you know, as of July 21. I think it should just say boundary, right? Because it's a map and just the boundary. I think those are the proposed changes that I'm hearing. And then we do have members of the public present online and in person. And so I'd like to open up for their comments to make sure we're not missing something or not thinking something through clearly, because this is a little bit of a change, not a change in intention, but just some change in language from what we had been talking about previously.
My name is John Townsley. I live at 305 West Pine Street in Zionsville, in a house that was built by John Hussey back in 1904. I've lived in the village since 1978 in homes that were in another home that was probably over 100 years as well. Those who know me know my interests in both history and historic preservation. I agree with Tom Castellini, and that is, I think you're creating a problem when you start to get into the village as opposed to the expansion to the south. Well, probably also know I'm an attorney and I've done zoning since I started practice in 1976. Worked under Bill Lamont, one of the best. Anyway, the way I would go at this, if I were a zoning attorney and wanted to zone property on the west side of 2nd Street, is I was always looking for the exception. That is, where has a rule been breached? And up until this point, 2nd Street has always been our boundary line in the area. It's, as you've seen from the letter I sent earlier to you, there are at least 3 historical homes, either adjacent to or within a very short distance of the AT&T building. These are some of the earliest homes, 2 of them are some of the earliest homes that we've had in Zionsville that are still standing. Pine Street itself contains a collection of some of the oldest and most historical homes in the village. And in fact, as Michael Sandy in his book about the home that he has on Pine Street says, within 200 paces, you can travel 200 years. And that is from the first log cabin on Hawthorne to the homes that exist there now. I speak, while I agree with Tom, and I think it actually should be limited to the south side, across the, well, to the south side, rather than going into the west. As an attorney, the best thing you can do for the residents in the village is to set a hard line and say you won't cross. And the best hard line is the one we've had for years, and that is 2nd Street. The AT&T building, let it go. That's a situation that we don't know when it's going to happen, whether it's in this century, the next, or whatever. The fact that you have written language as far as 1 and 2 family use, as an attorney, doesn't really impress me. Because what the loophole, as I think you recognize, is I would petition to turn a house through variance or zoning into a commercial use. And once I have that, or maybe contemporaneously at the same time, just as you have in a sense with the dentist's office, I would be petitioning for a facade grant and asking to go through as soon as I get my zoning. Can it happen? Well, most of you, I hope, know Ralph Stacy. Ralph lives across from Lions Park. It's in a home he was actually born in. It goes back that far. Anyway, Ralph owns the house next door to him, the one that's on Oak and 2nd. You may have noticed it was for lease. Ralph was approached by a realtor who told him that they wanted to buy it and turn it into a commercial, or lease it and turn it into a commercial use. And when asked about the zoning, said, that's not a concern, we'll be able to get it. So there are always people out there who may have an unrealistic idea of what they can and can't do, but they're out there. And so there's an old saying about good fences, good neighbors make. Well, the same is true for zoning boundaries. Put in, leave alone the boundary on 2nd Street. Leave the houses to the west alone. Don't set up anything that somebody like me can come back later and argue, well, you've already crossed 2nd Street. Now I want to move on to 3rd. 3rd Street, by the way, is only 3 houses away from 2nd Street, and they're small lots. So I live at 3rd and Pine. This is very close to me as far as what you do. And I understand your intent, and I realize it's good. You don't want to see residential homes turned into commercial. But I can tell you from experience, intent doesn't matter as much as the reality of the situation. So stay where you are. In addition, on your documents, and I couldn't help myself, I'm an attorney. There are several references to the facade program being set up for businesses within the village business district that have been left in there. So if you change the map, you're also going to have somebody, well, just your facade grant program, you've already pointed out some of the changes there, but the second sentence on page 3 of the facade grant program, the purpose of this program is to offer monies to property owners in the downtown village business district. Doesn't say the map, it says the village business district. On page 2 of 14 of your guidelines, the intent and application to promote the rehabilitation of facades of buildings located in the Zionsville Zionsville Business District. Zionsville Business District is capitalized, which means that it's a defined term. Wherever it's defined, I'm not quite sure. And enhance their architectural contribution to the character of the, again, capitalized business district. You have limited funds, generally $50,000 a year. I would suggest that the best use of those funds would be to apply them, as has always been the intent, to the business district. I would also suggest that the village residential district enhances the business district. We have a lot of people walk down our streets, especially on the weekends, and they're looking around and they're looking at the plaques, whether it's a sensory structure. And I believe that the two complement each other. I love walking down to the market, and I like the idea that in 2 blocks, 3 blocks, I can be on Main Street. On the other hand, I'll tell you, there are people who have gone to the market or whatever, who end up walking down the Sullivan Months. They end up walking down our streets and they like it the way it is. Zig Ziglar said, the important thing is to keep the first problem first. And your first problem is how to enhance the buildings within the business district. Let's keep it there. By the way, I'd also like to compliment you and thank you for your work. I was going through the guidelines and I was very impressed by those. In fact, I think I'm on the Historic Preservation Committee. We may borrow, otherwise known as plagiarize, some of those guidelines for the residences. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Well said.
Anyone else?
I have a question for John, if you don't mind.
Sure.
When you say keep it the way it is, are you referring to the line or are you referring to the original language? Because the original language talks about contiguous boundaries. And I fear that does more than the line we currently have, the new line. And so Sullivan Months matters more than the AT&T building, I think, in our line. But a contiguous to the old line versus the new line without the contiguous language is a big part of that conversation. So I think, the contiguous language is what we're trying to get rid of. And so if we go back,
depends on how you physically contiguous is how I believe that's always been interpreted. Mm-hmm. The comprehensive plan, and Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong, calls for the properties on the west side of 2nd Street to remain residential. So in the neighborhood, we've always interpreted that, at least, as being those properties which are physically contiguous, especially in light of the fact that the comprehensive plan says don't do anything on the west side of the lawn. So it could be tightened up. Or on the map, I suppose what you could do is take out the AT&T building. Who knows what's going to happen to that? And I don't have an answer on this one, but you've also crossed the line by including Sullivan Months. So, but on the other hand, Sullivan Months might want a facade grant, although it's a nice thing to do, but it's not a business. And your job basically is to enhance the business area. So at least for me, balancing those two, I try to keep that hard and fast line along 2nd Street. If I had a choice, I would go with the old definition since it keeps the AT&T building out. The reason, years ago, I joined the VRA because the now greenhouse on that would be the northwest side of 2nd and Pine was going to be rezoned through a variance to a bookstore. Then, of course, next door to it the Flannery Buchanan was going to tear down the Yellow House, which is really one of the oldest houses we have, and put in a parking lot. It was the one time in my career that I've ever been able to quote Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi about tearing down and putting up the parking lot, probably the height of my career. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's my feeling.
Yeah, thank you.
I have John mentioned Sullivan Months. I think Sullivan Months should be a part of our program for what they do for the community. And at the same time, in a sense, yes, they are a business. They do generate income for the town. For something that specific, I think we could actually put in language that they are grandfathered into the ZARC program, so that it's not an issue that we are crossing over. They are already there. They are already a contributor to the community financially, and just to grandfather them in ends it there. And I think for John that we are demonstrating respectfully your concerns, and I think I'm glad that you feel comfortable in the direction we're going. And the word zoning has come up several times. Zoning is not our business. We have no control over how things are zoned. And so I think we are so close to this. Let's just change a few more words and put this together today, or put it to bed today if we can.
Roger, is there anyone else who'd like to speak?
Yes, Heather Lusk has asked to speak. She is on Zoom and has been promoted. So Heather, if you could please, again, provide your name and address.
Hi, folks. I'm Heather Lusk. I live at 285 West Hawthorne Street. I am president of the Zionsville Village Residents Association. I too appreciate what Tom Castellini said earlier and agree with him that it has sometimes we're trying to complicate a very simple issue. And just by including what is south of Sycamore Street, it has turned into something that I think no one expected to take up this much time. I also will defer to what John said in terms of what a lawyer might do for zoning. My number one concern right now is that AT&T building being included, because who knows what will happen with it. They are, I wouldn't think AT&T would really need a facade grant, but a small business would. So why take money from a small business on Main Street and present it to a big company like AT&T? So just keeping them out of the mix might make the most sense. I know that the residents surrounding that property in particular are concerned, but we're unable to be here today. So that is my thought as well. And I like what you said, Tom, about Sullivan Months being grandfathered in. They do a lot for the community. So it would be nice to keep them, to help them if it's possible, but I don't know what that is under your restrictions. So that's all. Thank you.
And I would wholeheartedly agree with what Heather said in regards to the AT&T building. I think that is one that we don't need to incentivize, and I would feel far more comfortable drawing a straight line and removing that. But I also, I do like what Tom said about the idea of grandfathering in Sullivan Months as a legacy component that we do want to support, but clarifying our boundaries.
With that in mind, do we draw the boundary around Sullivan Months? Because I don't want, this isn't necessarily going to happen, but let's say Sullivan Months expands west or expands south. And if we just have words that say, Sullivan Months is grandfathered, I think that's too ambiguous. So it feels like we're saying don't jog the line around the AT&T building, but we should jog the line around the current boundary for Sullivan Months as shown in this map. Is that what people are thinking is okay.
I think we're choosing which risk we want to absorb, whether it's riskier to describe the Sullivan Months as a use case and however they might expand or not expand or move or not move. Because if they vacate that property, does that leave it then open for incentivizing a new business in that location? And do we want that? So I'm not sure which one. I'm kind of, I guess, processing which one feels better.
This is Dave. Can I offer a comment?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So a couple comments. First of all, I'm just sort of confused why this is such a big issue, but I would say two things. First of all, you all may or may not know that Sullivan Months actually asked and was denied a grant request some years ago. They were largely denied because they were not a business entity, like John Townsley said. That has nothing to do with the property boundaries. And since that time, we've incented the Lions Club, and I don't know to what degree our language, I think our language now, takes care of that issue. So that's comment number one. My comment number two would be, if there's this kind of concern about some ulterior motive, then I would say we just leave the language as it exists and not change it at all, because we've operated this way for, how many years now? 13, 12. And I think it's far beyond the reach of any individual, public, committee, government, or anybody else to speculate what they think may or may not happen with the AT&T project or anything else for that matter. And I'm just going to play this back and say, our third applicant was Claghorn. And if we go down the bunny trails that we're going down right now, you would basically have a derelict feed mill sitting there that somebody may or may not have torn down ultimately, because I don't think Kent would have gotten that project done without, the grant that this program funded. And I, personal opinion, it's a nice use of an historic or a memorable, project that's actually, contiguous with the village business district. So I think the more we try to do to put all these speculative things about whether or not Sullivan Months is here or there, and I'll another comment there, I think it is just shame on us. And I think we should just leave the boundaries exactly as they've been for the last 12 years and just move on. The whole South Main Street thing has come and gone. And I just don't think it's worth our while to pursue this any farther. And so I would make strong consideration that we just let the sleeping dog lie, which seems to be what the community is looking for anyway. The other comment I'm going to make about Sullivan Months is the Sullivan Months actually owns the two houses on Sycamore Street that they rent. So those are single family residential units. So just to throw a blanket over Sullivan Months, you can't do that either, because quite frankly, the organization a number of years ago looked at actually expanding to the south. And quite frankly, if, whatever happens down in that area, I'm going to assume is going to affect their property. So you can't just say Sullivan Months, you would have to now define the special use, use versus the residential use, and so on and so forth. And I think that's far beyond the purview of this committee. So I'm going to make a motion that this committee just place on hold any adoption to change the program boundaries at this time, and take this up for review at some point in time when the Zionsville zoning ordinances and or other governmental matters are, in the process of being updated. So that is a motion.
Dave, can I ask a question related to that motion?
Not yet. Somebody needs a second, or it
Okay.
needs to die for lack of a second.
I'll second.
Okay, now you can ask questions.
Are you recommending additionally that we leave the language the same about the contiguous properties?
Yes. I'm saying leave it all alone at this time.
I tend to agree because right now, Second Street is safe, always has been. It was never any of our intention to go there. I think our main intent that when we started this crazy conversation was to assure the public that we're not going south, we're not going west, we're all good. And the AT&T building was never ever a part of it. We have no control. That's the town's issues if AT&T vacates that. So after all this, I think we just let it lie for a while. I think everyone is comfortable with it. They know our intentions. I think we have assured the public that is our main concern of where we're going. And I think they are comfortable, and we have been respectful of their concerns.
Tend to agree.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. So Roger, roll call.
Do you want to clarify what the I stands for and what an A would stand for? Just to make sure everyone's
Yeah,
clear.
so an I would be to not make any changes to the existing facade grant program, language maps, et cetera. This whole conversation has been about making changes to the documents as they exist today, and the I vote would be to leave them as they are.
Thank you. Todd Rutman,
Aye.
Tom Castellini,
Aye.
David Roush,
Aye.
Michael Billig,
Nay.
Steve Freeland,
Aye.
Steve Herron,
Aye.
Carol Weber,
Aye.
All right, so the ayes have it, so we'll leave it as it is for now. And if we choose to address it at a later point, we can do that.
Anybody have any champagne?
No, I'm a little upset that it just died and that we don't. Contiguous means next to, so it can be across the street. So I'm a little upset that we're not getting rid of that verbiage.
Yeah, I think, I agree with that because I think we were doing some really good things. However, every time we keep adding language, there were other ramifications of it, it sounds like. And I just worry that one is not better than the other, that things can be interpreted or misconstrued or changed almost no matter what we do. And since we don't have any current issues with how the program's been operating, it's nice to not open up a can of worms for potential other problems. But I would like to
One other item. John had some great. Sorry, Todd, to cut you off. One other item. I'm gonna lose you here in a little bit. One other item is does our zoning, Zionsville Business District, does that represent our current map?
That I don't know without looking at the zoning map.
I thought that was a great item. If it doesn't quite represent it, we could just say per the ZARC map. Clarification, but let's keep it as is, and then maybe down the road we'll revisit it.
To John Townsley's point, there's some language in here that is not currently consistent, where some things are capitalized, sometimes they're not. Sometimes we're referencing the village business district as it's zoned. Other times we're just doing it as kind of a general term. So I think there are a lot of ambiguous and kind of potentially conflicting language in the way that it's set. But I think the intent is clear, and we've discussed it over the last couple of months so that everybody understands what the intent is. I do think down the road that all needs to be cleaned up from a legal standpoint so that it's consistent and truly defines the intent a little bit better. But at this point, it seems like anything that we do causes a whole nother group of issues. I would probably recommend that town staff, work with the town's attorney in looking at the language to make sure from a legal standpoint, the language is consistent and meets the intent of the organization, and maybe make some motions to clarify things from a legal standpoint, as opposed to us kind of changing the language ourselves.
I agree with that. I think that's a good idea. And to go back to what David said earlier, for the last 12 or 13 years, we've operated very smoothly without any of these issues. So it's all because we are trying to be nice people and include South Main Street, for God's sakes.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Really? Okay, we've put that to bed. Let's move on.
All right, so moving on to the next item, additional funding for the Cohatch and the Tipsy Mermaid projects. We weren't able to review additional funding last week because we did not have a quorum.
Last month.
Yep. So David Roush, being one of the representatives for an applicant, would you like to recuse yourself from this portion of the meeting?
Consider me recused, please.
All right. Great. So our discussion last month was that we are looking to, and it's not been approved, but we would be looking at wanting to fund the Nicholson project with a $25,000 grant when their application was $25,824. So that would leave an additional $25,000 in this year's budget that could be allocated to the Cohatch and Tipsy Mermaid projects. We have looked at the eligible costs for each of those projects and taken the 40% value of that could be a possible ZARC grant. And for the Cohatch project, they had an eligible $65,398. And for the Tipsy Mermaid project, they had $38,520 that were eligible. That puts the Cohatch at 63% of the available of that grand total of additional funding asks, puts the Tipsy Mermaid at 37%. So if we take that 63% and 37% times the $25,000 that we have, that would put an amount for Cohatch of additional funding that we have available at $15,750. And for Tipsy Mermaid, it would be $9,250. And so that's a lot of words that in summary just mean we've got 25,000. We want to provide additional funding to Cohatch and Tipsy Mermaid. Let's divide it proportionately to their total project cost. And those are the numbers that we come up with. So any discussion on that?
I'd like to clarify one thing. You mentioned applicable amounts, and that's 40% of. So using the 40% ratio versus the $25,000 max, that's what we were looking at. So their total applicable costs were in the, for example, Cohatch was 160,000, I believe, and Tipsy Mermaid obviously higher than 38,000, but 40% of those applicable costs are the numbers you've communicated.
Yes, that is correct. if we were going to fund 40% of total eligible costs, those would be the dollar values. Any discussion on that, or does that sound like a good way to allocate the additional funds?
I make a motion to allocate the funds as defined.
Do we have a second?
Steve, I'll make a second on that.
All right, any further discussion before a vote? All right, hearing none. Roger, roll call.
Tom Castellini,
Aye.
Michael Billig,
Aye.
Steve Freeland,
Aye.
Steve Herron,
Aye.
Carol Weber,
Aye.
Todd Rutman.
Aye. All right, so that motion passes. New business, introduction and discussion of measures required to continue electronic meetings. There's information that's been included. I don't know if Roger or Wayne wants to talk more about this and what our requirements are going to be.
I just want to bring to your attention, I mean, certainly we are still under public health emergency, declaratory disaster documentation conversations. At some time when we are done with this process, certainly this town, in all communities wish to move forward and keep utilizing the electronic meeting processes that have been, we've benefited greatly from. And so as a part of that, boards, commissions would need to adopt electronic meeting policies and procedures. So this is just bringing to your attention, just like the earlier discussions about involving the town's attorney to review the documentation of the organization. Certainly the grant forms, she already has those. We've been working on those for a few months here. But all boards and commissions will be adopting electronic meeting policies. So we'll bring you one in terms of what that will look like. But ultimately, it looks to facilitate exactly what you've been experiencing here in terms of, or very similar to what you've been experiencing here as we move forward.
All right, so we're not voting on anything today. It's more just an introduction that we will be voting on something.
Correct. We will,
when the town presents us kind of a final draft of what the language should be.
correct. And there could be a disconnect between the time of the ending of a public health emergency and your adoption of a public electronic meeting policy. And if that's the case, you'll simply conduct your meetings in accordance with whatever laws of the land that are in place at that time. And until such time that a public policy is in place for this particular group, we'll pivot to that as soon as it's available.
All right.
So this policy will be uniform for all public meetings?
Correct. It's state of Indiana has adopted and is working through additional changes. And so this should be uniform across the state. Organizations would I would think look to use this. This is a wonderful way to facilitate transparency, enhance transparency of the public process.
Did I read that there's going to be required public attendance at a certain number of the meetings?
If that is the final language, which it is not yet.
I saw it in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question that I'd like that will kind of fold into a request. I've noticed I've been virtual the last couple of meetings, taking minutes, and I noticed that when going back and reviewing some of the comments for clarity, there's no attendance or roll call very clear on the recorded videos, or even during the meeting was a little bit unclear to know. And so I realized, like last month, I don't feel confident that I had all the public or all the non-speaking members noted. And so is there a way, I guess the request today is, can I make sure I've got everybody on the line written down today? And also, can that be part of the topic for when we bring it to the table? There's some sort of exported list of attendees for any virtual meeting.
Oh, for all virtual meetings, no matter who the jurisdiction is, if whatever platform you're using, for Zoom, for example, would provide an ample amount of data for the town to access in terms of attendees, logins, logouts, email addresses. So there's there's all sorts of data that we're happy to provide if that's helpful.
Yeah.
In terms of your reporting. Certainly, in the same breath, as you speak of minutes, given that we are benefiting from Zoom and we have transcription services, that will be another pivot point, is that we will move to a transcription service, unless you really like to continue to do the minutes. Okay, very good.
Yeah. I'll go out happily.
Very good.
All right, any other discussion on that? Hearing none, the next meeting is at 8 a.m. on August the 24th, 2021. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
All right, do we have a second?
A second.
All right, we have a motion from Tom Castellini, a second from Steve Freeland. Roger, roll call.
Michael Billick,
Aye.
Steve Freeland,
Aye.
Steve Heron. Aye. Carol Weber,
Aye.
Todd Rotman,
Aye.
Tom Castellini,
Aye.
David Roush.
I guess aye.
Thank you.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Y'all enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Take care.